Marcus Williams had been driving for 3 hours straight when he finally saw the lights of Millfield ahead. His old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as he pulled into the small town that was supposed to be his fresh start. The year was 1987, and Marcus, a 32-year-old African-American construction worker, had left Detroit after losing his job at the auto plant. He had heard about work opportunities in this rural Michigan town, but as he drove down Main Street, he noticed the stares from people on the sidewalks. The motel owner, a thin man with suspicious eyes, reluctantly handed him a key after Marcus paid for a week in advance. "Room 12, the man muttered without making eye contact. "Checkout is at 10 sharp. The room was small and smelled of old cigarettes, but it was clean enough. Marcus unpacked his few belongings and tried to get some rest before starting his job search in the morning. The next day, Marcus walked into Henderson Construction Company, the largest employer in town. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with gray hair, looked surprised when he asked about the job advertisement he had seen in the Detroit newspaper. "Oh, that position," she said, glancing nervously toward the back office. "Mr. Henderson is in a meeting right now. You might want to try back later." Marcus waited for 2 hours in the small lobby, watching other men come and go. Some were clearly there for job interviews, but they were all white. When Mr. Henderson finally appeared, he was a large man in his 50s with work-worn hands and a permanent scowl. He looked Marcus up and down before speaking. "You hear about the construction job?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, standing up and extending his hand. "I have 15 years of experience in construction and excellent references from my previous employers in Detroit." Henderson barely glanced at the folder Marcus offered. "Look, son," he said, not taking the handshake. "This is a small town. People here like to work with folks they know and trust. Maybe you should try the next town over. I heard they might have some openings." Marcus felt his stomach drop, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm willing to work hard, sir. I've done everything from foundation work to roofing. I can start at minimum wage if that helps." Henderson shook his head. "It's not about the money. It's about fit. This job requires someone who can get along with the crew, and frankly, I don't think you'd be comfortable here." The message was clear, even if the words danced around it. As Marcus left the construction office, he noticed a group of men in work clothes watching him from across the street. Their expressions were not friendly. He decided to try other businesses in town. At the hardware store, the owner claimed he wasn't hiring. At the diner, the manager said they only hired local girls. Even at the gas station, where a help wanted sign hung in the window, the owner suddenly remembered that his nephew had already filled the position. By the end of the week, Marcus had knocked on every door in Millfield. The answer was always the same, delivered with varying degrees of politeness, but the meaning never changed. Word had spread quickly through the small town about the outsider looking for work, and it seemed that invisible doors were closing everywhere he went. His money was running low, and the motel owner had started giving him dirty looks. Marcus knew he would have to leave soon if he couldn't find work. He spent his evenings walking around the quiet streets, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in coming here. The town seemed peaceful enough, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses, but underneath the surface, he could feel an undercurrent of hostility. On his last night at the motel, Marcus sat on the bed counting his remaining money. He had enough for gas to get back to Detroit, but not much else. The thought of returning defeated after only a week filled him with shame. He had told his friends and family that he was starting fresh, that things would be different in a small town. Now he would have to admit that some things never changed. As he prepared for bed, Marcus heard voices outside his window. 3 men were standing in the parking lot, and one of them was pointing at his room. "That's his truck," one of them said. "He's been here a week, stirring up trouble." "Maybe it's time someone had a talk with him," another voice replied. "Let him know he's not welcome here." Marcus quickly turned off the lights and moved away from the window. His heart was pounding as he listened to the men discuss whether they should do something tonight or wait until morning. Eventually their voices faded as they walked away, but Marcus didn't sleep much that night. The next morning he packed his belongings with heavy shoulders. As he loaded his truck, the motel owner appeared with a satisfied smile. "Checking out early?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied quietly. "Probably for the best," the man said. "Small towns like this, they have their own ways of doing things. Outsiders don't always understand." Marcus nodded and got into his truck. As he started the engine, he took one last look at Millfield. It was a pretty town, with its white church steeple reaching toward the sky and American flags hanging from several porches. But for him, it had been nothing but closed doors and cold shoulders. He drove slowly down Main Street past all the businesses that had turned him away. A few people on the sidewalks watched him go, their faces showing neither regret nor sympathy. As he reached the edge of town, Marcus felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. He had tried his best, but sometimes that wasn't enough. The road ahead stretched empty and uncertain. He didn't know where he would go next or how he would rebuild his life, but he knew he couldn't give up. Somewhere out there was a place where his skills and willingness to work would be valued more than the color of his skin. He just had to keep looking. Marcus had driven only 5 miles when his truck started making a terrible grinding sound. Steam began pouring from under the hood, and he barely managed to pull over to the side of the road before the engine died completely. He sat there for a moment, staring at the steam rising from his vehicle, feeling like this was the final blow in a week of defeats. Getting out to investigate, Marcus lifted the hood and immediately saw the problem. The radiator hose had burst and coolant was everywhere. His truck was at least 20 years old, and finding parts wouldn't be easy or cheap. He looked back toward Millfield, then ahead down the empty highway. He was stuck between a town that didn't want him and an uncertain destination he couldn't reach. As he stood there wondering what to do next, an old blue Ford pickup pulled up behind him. Marcus tensed, remembering the voices outside his motel room the night before. A man in his 60s got out wearing faded work clothes and a baseball cap. He was white with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Looks like you got some trouble there," the man said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "I'm Robert Chen. I saw the steam from my driveway back there." Marcus was surprised by the Asian surname, but relieved by the man's gentle demeanor. "Marcus Williams," he replied. "Yeah, the radiator hose gave out. I was just leaving town when it happened." Robert walked over to look at the engine. "That's a pretty old hose. Probably been ready to go for a while. You got somewhere you need to be urgently?" "Not really," Marcus admitted. "I was looking for work in Millfield, but it didn't work out. Now I'm not sure where I'm headed." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Millfield can be a tough place for newcomers. I've lived here for 30 years, and some folks still treat me like I just arrived yesterday." He studied the broken hose more carefully. "Tell you what, I've got some tools and probably a hose that'll fit this at my place. It's just down the road. Why don't you come back with me and we'll get you fixed up?" Marcus hesitated. After a week of rejection, kindness felt almost suspicious. "I don't want to impose, sir. And I should tell you up front, I don't have much money right now." "Who said anything about money?" Robert smiled. "My daddy always taught me that when you see someone in trouble, you help if you can. Come on, let's get your truck towed back to my place." Robert's property was a small farm with a modest house, a large workshop, and several acres of vegetables. As they worked together to fix the truck, Robert shared his story. He had come to America from Taiwan in the 1950s with nothing but a suitcase and determination. He had worked in restaurants, saved every penny, and eventually bought this small farm where he grew vegetables to sell at farmers' markets. "The first 10 years were the hardest," Robert said as they installed the new hose. "People in town didn't know what to make of me. Some were hostile, others just ignored me. But I kept working, kept being neighborly, and eventually most folks came around. Though I'll admit, some never did." As they worked, Marcus found himself opening up about his own struggles. He talked about losing his job in Detroit, about his hope for a fresh start, and about the week of closed doors in Millfield. Robert listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions or offering encouragement. "You know," Robert said as they finished the repair, "I might have some work for you here on the farm. It's not construction, but it's honest work. The pay isn't much, but I've got a small cabin out back that needs some fixing up. You could stay there if you want." Marcus looked around the peaceful farm. The vegetables were growing in neat rows, and he could hear chickens clucking somewhere behind the barn. It wasn't what he had planned, but it felt like a lifeline. "I'd be grateful for the work, Mr. Chen. I'm good with my hands, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Call me Robert," the older man said with a smile. "And I can see you're a worker. The way you handled those tools, the way you listened and asked good questions, I've got a feeling you'll fit in just fine here." That evening, as Marcus settled into the small but comfortable cabin, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. The cabin had electricity and running water, and Robert had insisted on sharing his dinner of rice, vegetables, and fish. They had eaten on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Tomorrow we'll start with the vegetable harvest," Robert had said. "Farmer's market is Saturday and I need all the help I can get. After that, there's plenty of work around here. The barn needs a new roof, the chicken coop needs expanding, and I've been wanting to build a greenhouse for years." Marcus had gone to bed that night feeling more hopeful than he had in weeks. But his contentment was interrupted around midnight by the sound of vehicles pulling into the driveway. Through his window, he could see the headlights of several trucks. Car doors slammed and he heard angry voices. "Chen," someone shouted. "We know you got that troublemaker staying here. This is a respectable community, and we won't have outsiders coming in and disrupting things." Marcus quickly put on his clothes and stepped outside. In the glare of the headlights, he could see 5 or 6 men standing in Robert's yard. Robert emerged from his house in a bathrobe, looking small and vulnerable compared to the group of younger men. "What's this about, Thompson?" Robert asked, addressing a large man who seemed to be the leader. "You know exactly what this is about," Thompson replied. "We heard you're harboring that troublemaker who was stirring up problems in town all week. People are upset, Robert. They don't want his kind around here." Marcus stepped forward into the light. "I'm here," he said calmly. "What exactly is the problem?" Thompson turned to face him and Marcus could see the hatred in his eyes. "The problem is you don't belong here. We already made that clear in town. Now you're trying to sneak in through the back door using the old man here." "Robert offered me honest work," Marcus said. "I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to earn a living." "Well, you can earn it somewhere else," another man said. "We don't want your type in our community." Robert stepped between Marcus and the group. Despite being smaller and older than any of the men, he stood straight and spoke firmly. "This is my property and Marcus is my guest. You men need to leave," Thompson laughed harshly. "Robert, you've always been different, but you're still part of this community. Don't throw that away for some drifter who'll be gone in a week anyway." The tension in the air was thick and Marcus could see that this situation was about to get much worse. He had brought trouble to the one person who had shown him kindness, and he couldn't let Robert suffer for it. Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised peacefully but his voice firm. "Look, I don't want any trouble. If my being here is causing problems for Robert, I'll pack up and leave tonight." "Marcus, no," Robert said quickly, turning to face him. "This is exactly what they want. You run now and they'll think they can chase away anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view of the world." Thompson spat into the dirt. "This ain't your fight, Chen. You've been a decent neighbor for years. Don't ruin that now for some stranger." "He's not a stranger anymore," Robert replied, his voice growing stronger. "He's a good man who needs work and I need help. That should be the end of it." Marcus could see the fear in Robert's eyes even as the older man stood his ground. This small farmer was risking everything he had built over 30 years for someone he had known for less than a day. The weight of that sacrifice made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. "You got until tomorrow night to get rid of him," another man in the group called out. "After that, we can't guarantee what might happen. Accidents occur around here sometimes." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew that responding with violence would only make things worse for both him and Robert. "Is that a threat?" Robert asked, his voice surprisingly steady. Thompson shrugged. "It's just friendly advice. Bad things happen when communities get disrupted. Property gets damaged, people get hurt. Better to avoid all that unpleasantness." As the group turned to leave, Thompson paused and looked back at Marcus. "You seem like a smart man. Don't make this harder than it has to be. There's a whole big country out there. Find somewhere else to be." After the trucks pulled away, Marcus and Robert stood in the sudden quiet of the farm. The crickets had stopped chirping and even the chickens seemed to sense the tension that lingered in the air. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "I should never have involved you in this." Robert shook his head. "You didn't involve me in anything. I made a choice to help and I'd make the same choice again." He looked toward the road where the trucks had disappeared. "I've seen this before, Marcus. When I first came here, there were people who wanted me gone too. The difference is I had nowhere else to go, so I had to stay and fight. But you built a life here over 30 years. I've been here one day. It's not worth risking everything you've worked for." "What's the point of building a life if you can't live according to your values?" Robert asked. "My father used to tell me that a man's character is measured not by what he does when it's easy, but by what he does when it's hard." They walked back toward the house, both lost in thought. Robert made tea and they sat on the porch looking out over the dark fields. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. "Tell me about your family," Robert said after a while. Marcus smiled for the first time that day. "I've got a sister in Detroit, Sarah. She's a teacher. Keeps telling me I should go back to school, get my degree. My parents passed a few years back, but they were good people. My father worked in the steel mills his whole life, never complained once." "What would he tell you to do now?" Marcus thought for a long moment. "He'd tell me to work hard, treat people with respect, and never let anyone make me feel ashamed of who I am." He paused. "But he'd also tell me not to put good people in danger because of my problems." "And what does your heart tell you to do?" "My heart tells me I'm tired of running. Tired of letting other people's fear and hatred control my life." Marcus looked at Robert. "But I'm also scared. Not for me, but for you. These men, they're serious about their threats." Robert nodded. "I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of what happens to a community when good people stay silent, when we let fear make our decisions for us." They talked until nearly dawn, sharing stories about their families, their dreams, and their fears. Marcus learned that Robert had never married, dedicating his life to his farm and his vegetables. Robert learned that Marcus had once dreamed of starting his own construction company, before economic hardship and discrimination had worn down his hopes. As the sun rose over the fields, painting everything in golden light, both men felt something had changed between them. They were no longer just a helper and an employer, but allies facing a common challenge. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked as they watched the sunrise. "We do what we planned to do," Robert said firmly. "We harvest vegetables, we prepare for the farmer's market, and we show this community that two men working together in peace is stronger than a mob driven by hate." But as they walked toward the vegetable fields, both men knew that the confrontation the night before was just the beginning. Thompson and his friends wouldn't give up easily, and the next 24 hours would test everything they believed about courage, friendship, and doing what was right. Marcus bent down to pick the first tomato of the day, its red skin warm from the early morning sun. Whatever happened next, he had decided he wouldn't run. Not this time. He would stand with Robert, and together they would face whatever came their way. Behind them, the small cabin that had become his temporary home looked peaceful in the morning light. For the first time in months, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere. That feeling was worth fighting for. As they worked side by side in the quiet of the early morning, neither man spoke about the trucks that might return that evening, or the threats that hung over them like storm clouds. Instead, they focused on the simple, honest work of harvesting food that would feed their community. It seemed like the most hopeful thing they could do. Saturday morning came gray and cloudy with the threat of rain hanging in the air. Marcus and Robert loaded the truck with crates of fresh vegetables before dawn, working mostly in silence. Both men knew that going to the farmer's market would be a test, but neither wanted to voice their concerns. The Millfield Farmer's Market was held every Saturday in the town square, just 2 blocks from Main Street. As they drove into town, Marcus noticed several people pointing and staring at Robert's truck. Word had clearly spread about the confrontation at the farm. "Maybe I should stay with the truck," Marcus suggested as they pulled into their assigned spot. "Absolutely not," Robert replied firmly. "We're in this together and hiding won't solve anything." They set up their booth methodically, arranging the tomatoes, corn, green beans, and squash in attractive displays. Robert had been selling at this market for 15 years, and he knew exactly how to make his produce look appealing. Marcus helped silently, aware of the whispers and stares from other vendors and early shoppers. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who ran the flower booth next to theirs, approached hesitantly. She had been friendly with Robert for years, often sharing coffee and conversation during slow periods. "Robert," she said quietly, glancing nervously at Marcus, "maybe you should consider. People are talking and some folks are pretty upset." "Good morning, Helen," Robert replied pleasantly, as if he hadn't heard the warning in her voice. "I'd like you to meet Marcus Williams. He's been helping me with the farm work. Marcus, this is Helen Patterson. She grows the most beautiful roses in 3 counties. Marcus extended his hand politely. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson hesitated before briefly shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you too," she said, though her voice lacked warmth. She hurried back to her booth, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The first hour of the market was slow. Their regular customers seemed to be avoiding their booth, instead shopping at other vegetable stands that charged higher prices for inferior produce. Marcus watched Robert's face carefully, seeing the disappointment and hurt that the older man tried to hide. Around 9 o'clock, a group of women approached their booth. Marcus recognized one of them as the secretary from Henderson Construction Company. They looked at the vegetables but made no move to buy anything. "These tomatoes look nice, Robert," one of them said, "but I heard they might not be safe. You never know what kind of contamination you might get when you change your workers." The insult was delivered with a sweet smile, but the venom was unmistakable. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but Robert remained calm. "Every vegetable here was grown with the same care and attention I've always used," Robert said evenly. "Marcus has been a tremendous help. The quality is as good as it's ever been." The women exchanged meaningful looks and moved on without purchasing anything. Similar scenes played out several more times over the next hour. People would approach, make subtle or not so subtle comments, and leave without buying anything. Marcus watched Robert's usual cheerful demeanor slowly fade as customer after customer passed them by. The older man had spent decades building relationships in this community, and now he was watching them crumble because he had chosen to help a stranger. "Robert," Marcus said quietly, "this isn't fair to you. You're losing customers because of me." "And what would you have me do?" Robert asked. "Send you away to protect my vegetable sales? What kind of man would that make me?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thompson and 2 other men from the previous night's confrontation. They didn't approach the booth directly, but positioned themselves near the gazebo in the center of the square, where they could be seen by everyone at the market. "Looks like they're making sure everyone knows they're watching," Marcus observed. "Let them watch," Robert said, but Marcus could hear the tension in his voice. Around 10:30, when it seemed like the morning would be a complete loss, an unexpected customer appeared. Father Miguel Rodriguez, the priest from St. Mary's Catholic Church, approached their booth with a warm smile. "Good morning, Robert," he said in accented English. "I need vegetables for the church potluck tomorrow. What do you recommend?" Robert's face brightened for the first time all morning. "Father Rodriguez, good to see you. Everything is fresh picked yesterday." He introduced Marcus, and the priest shook his hand warmly. "Welcome to our community, Marcus. I hope you're finding it hospitable." The simple kindness in the priest's voice made Marcus's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Father. Robert has been very generous." Father Rodriguez bought $60 worth of vegetables, more than he probably needed for any church potluck. As he prepared to leave, he spoke loudly enough for nearby vendors to hear. "Robert, these are the finest vegetables I've seen all season. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up." His public endorsement was clearly intentional, and Marcus saw several people watching the interaction with interest. After the priest left, a few other customers began approaching their booth. An elderly man bought corn, saying he had been shopping Robert's booth for years and wasn't about to stop now. A young mother with 2 children bought tomatoes, smiling shyly at Marcus as she counted out her money. But the real breakthrough came when 6 men approached their booth together around 11 o'clock. Marcus tensed, wondering if this was another confrontation, but Robert stepped forward with surprise and relief in his voice. "John, Mike, what are you all doing here?" John Kowalski, a Polish-American carpenter in his 40s, stepped forward as the spokesman for the group. "We heard you might be having some trouble today, Robert. Thought we'd come show our support." Marcus recognized 2 of the other men from around town. Mike Chen, no relation to Robert, a Chinese-American who owned the town's small restaurant, and David Running Bear, a Native American who worked as a mechanic. The other 3 were men Marcus had seen but didn't know personally. "This is Marcus," Robert said, his voice warm with gratitude. "Marcus, these are some good friends of mine." John shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Any friend of Robert's is a friend of ours. We know what it's like to be outsiders in a small town." Mike Chen nodded agreement. "When I opened my restaurant 10 years ago, some people said Chinese food would never succeed here. Robert was one of my first customers, came in every Friday night until other people started coming too." David Running Bear smiled quietly. "Small towns can be hard on people who are different, but they can also be good places if you find the right people to stand with." The 6 men didn't just shake hands and leave. They stayed at the booth making conversation, buying vegetables, and making it clear to everyone in the market that they were there to support both Robert and Marcus. Their presence changed the entire atmosphere of the morning. Word spread quickly through the market about the show of support, and Marcus noticed that Thompson and his friends looked increasingly uncomfortable. Other customers began approaching the booth more freely, and by noon, they had sold nearly everything they had brought. As they packed up their empty crates, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving in Millfield: hope. Not everyone in this town was driven by fear and prejudice. Some people were willing to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. The success at the farmers' market had lifted both men's spirits, but as evening approached, the memory of Thompson's deadline hung heavy in the air. Robert insisted they celebrate their good day with a proper dinner, cooking fresh corn and tomatoes from their own harvest while Marcus grilled fish that Father Rodriguez had brought by as a gift. "You know," Robert said as they ate on the porch, "today reminded me why I stayed in this town all these years. Yes, there are people like Thompson who are driven by fear, but there are also people like John and Mike and David who understand what community really means." Marcus nodded, but his eyes kept drifting to the road. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and Thompson had said they had until tonight to resolve the situation. "Robert, I need you to know that if things go badly tonight, I want you to step aside. These men have a problem with me, not you. And I need you to know that's not going to happen," Robert replied firmly. "We're past the point where you can protect me by leaving. They've already seen me take a stand. If you run now, it just teaches them that threats and intimidation work." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of vehicles approaching made both men tense. But instead of the angry voices they expected, they heard car doors closing quietly and footsteps approaching the porch. John Kowalski emerged from the darkness, followed by Mike Chen, David Running Bear, and the 3 other men who had supported them at the market. Behind them came Father Rodriguez and 2 other men Marcus didn't recognize. "Evening, Robert Marcus," John said quietly. "Mind if we join you?" "Of course," Robert said, though his voice showed his confusion. "What brings you all out here tonight?" Mike Chen stepped forward. "Word gets around fast in a small town. We heard Thompson and his friends might be paying you another visit tonight. We thought you might like some company," David Running Bear added with a slight smile. Marcus felt overwhelmed by this unexpected show of support. "You don't need to get involved in this. It's not your fight." "Actually, it is our fight," Father Rodriguez said gently. "This is about what kind of community we want to be. Do we let fear and hatred make decisions for us, or do we stand up for what's right?" One of the men Marcus didn't know stepped forward. "I'm Tom Bradley. I teach at the high school here. My grandfather was Irish, and when he came to this town in the 1920s, people said the same things about him that they're saying about you now, that he didn't belong, that he'd bring trouble." The other stranger introduced himself as Sam Martinez, who owned the town's small grocery store. "My family came here from Mexico 15 years ago. Robert was one of the first people to welcome us, to buy from our store when other people were suspicious." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. 8 men of different backgrounds, different ages, but united in their determination to stand up for what was right. He had never experienced anything like this before. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Because it's the right thing to do," John said simply, "and because somebody has to stand up to bullies or they just keep getting worse." They didn't have long to wait. Around 9:30, the sound of multiple vehicles filled the night air. But this time, when Thompson and his friends arrived, they found not just Robert and Marcus, but 10 men standing together on the porch. Thompson got out of his truck slowly, clearly surprised by what he saw. He had brought more men this time. Marcus counted at least a dozen, but the presence of respected community members had changed the dynamic completely. Well, Thompson said, trying to sound confident. "Looks like we've got ourselves a regular little gathering here." John stepped down from the porch to face Thompson directly. As a local carpenter who had grown up in Millfield, he carried weight in the community that Thompson couldn't simply dismiss. "Evening, Dave," John said, using Thompson's first name deliberately. "Beautiful night, isn't it? We were just visiting with Robert and Marcus here, talking about community values." Thompson's face flushed red in the porch light. "Don't lecture me about community values, Kowalski. You know as well as I do that this town works because we stick together, because we know who belongs and who doesn't." "And who gets to decide who belongs?" Father Rodriguez asked, stepping forward. "You?" The church teaches us that we are all children of God, all deserving of dignity and respect. This isn't about religion, Father, Thompson replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. This is about preserving the character of our community. David Running Bear spoke quietly, but his words carried across the yard. My people were here before any of your families, Dave. If we're talking about who belongs, maybe we should start there. A murmur went through Thompson's group. Several of them looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Sam Martinez stepped forward. Dave, you shop at my store. Your wife buys groceries there every week. If outsiders are so dangerous, why do you trust me with your family's food? Thompson was clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. The presence of respected community members had taken away his ability to use simple intimidation. This is different and you all know it. How is it different? Tom Bradley asked. Because Marcus is black? Because you think skin color determines character? I'm not racist. Thompson protested loudly. This is about maintaining order, about keeping troublemakers out. What trouble has Marcus caused? Robert asked, speaking up for the first time. He's worked hard, been respectful to everyone he's met, and helped me harvest vegetables that half this town ate at dinner tonight. Marcus stepped forward, and the entire group fell silent. He had been listening to these men defend him, fight for him, risk their own standing in the community for him. Now it was his turn to speak. Mr. Thompson, he said quietly, I understand your concerns. I really do. Change can be frightening and outsiders can disrupt the way things have always been done. He paused, looking directly at Thompson. But I'm not here to cause trouble or disrupt anyone's life. I'm here to work, to be a good neighbor, to contribute to this community. He gestured to the men standing with him. These gentlemen have shown me what this town can be at its best. They've shown me that Millfield is a place where people can be judged by their character, rather than their appearance, where neighbors help neighbors regardless of where they came from. Thompson looked around at his own group, and Marcus could see that several of them were wavering. The moral authority of the men standing with Marcus was hard to argue against. The silence stretched across the farmyard like a taut wire. Thompson looked from face to face, seeing doubt creeping into the eyes of his own supporters. One by one, some of the men he had brought began stepping back toward their trucks. This isn't over, Thompson said, but his voice lacked conviction. He pointed at Marcus. You think these bleeding hearts will always be here to protect you? Small towns have long memories. Yes, they do, John Kowalski replied firmly. And they'll remember tonight. They'll remember who stood for decency and who stood for fear. Thompson's face twisted with frustration. He had expected an easy confrontation with a frightened old farmer and a desperate outsider. Instead, he found himself facing the moral leadership of his own community. Without another word, he stalked back to his truck. Most of his group followed, though Marcus noticed that a few lingered, looking uncertain. One of Thompson's men, a younger fellow with work-stained clothes, approached the porch hesitantly. Mr. Chen, he said to Robert, I wanted to apologize. I shouldn't have come here last night. It wasn't right. Robert nodded graciously. Thank you for saying that, Billy. That takes courage. Billy looked at Marcus. I don't know you, sir, but I judged you before I met you. My grandmother always said that was the mark of a small mind. He extended his hand. Billy Morrison. Marcus shook it warmly. Marcus Williams. No hard feelings, Billy. We all make mistakes. After Thompson and his remaining supporters had driven away, the 10 men who had stood with Marcus didn't immediately leave. They gathered on the porch and in the yard, talking quietly about what had just happened. This was bigger than just tonight, Tom Bradley observed. This was about what kind of town we want to be going forward. Father Rodriguez nodded. Change is never easy, but sometimes it's necessary for growth. Tonight showed that this community has good people willing to do what's right. Mike Chen turned to Marcus. So what are your plans now? You're welcome in this town, but I imagine you have dreams beyond vegetable farming. Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. Actually, I've been thinking about that. Robert mentioned he wants to build a greenhouse. I have construction experience, and I've been learning about farming this past week. Maybe there's a way to combine those skills. There's definitely a market for fresh vegetables year-round, Sam Martinez said thoughtfully. My customers are always asking for local produce in winter. John Kowalski's eyes lit up. You know, I've been looking for a partner to help expand my carpentry business. There's enough work in the county for 2 crews, but I needed someone with construction experience to help run things. As the evening wore on, what started as a confrontation turned into a planning session. Marcus found himself at the center of a web of opportunities and friendships that he couldn't have imagined a week earlier. David Running Bear mentioned that the tribe's casino was planning an expansion and needed contractors. Tom Bradley talked about adult education classes at the high school for people wanting to learn new skills. By the time the men finally said their goodbyes and headed home, Marcus had 3 job offers and an invitation to Sunday dinner at Father Rodriguez's church. "You know what this means?" Robert asked as they sat alone on the porch, watching the last car disappear down the road. "That I need to call my sister and tell her I'm staying in Millfield?" Robert laughed. "Well, yes, that too. But it also means we're going to need a bigger breakfast table. Something tells me we're going to have a lot more visitors around here." Over the following weeks, Marcus's life in Millfield transformed completely. He started working with John Kowalski 3 days a week, learning the finer points of carpentry while applying his construction knowledge to local projects. The other 2 days he spent helping Robert expand the farm operation, including planning for the greenhouse they would build together in the spring. The town's attitude toward him shifted gradually but noticeably. Success at the farmers' market led to more customers seeking out Robert's produce specifically. Marcus's work with John earned respect from other contractors and homeowners who saw the quality of their craftsmanship. Father Rodriguez's church welcomed him warmly, and he found himself volunteering for community projects almost every weekend. Not everyone in Millfield changed their minds overnight. Thompson and a few others remained hostile, crossing the street to avoid encounters and muttering complaints at town meetings. But they were increasingly in the minority, and their influence waned as Marcus proved himself through his actions rather than his words. The real breakthrough came 3 months later, when the high school's gymnasium roof collapsed. After a heavy snowstorm, the school board needed emergency repairs before the building could reopen, and John's carpentry business was too small to handle the job alone. Marcus suggested they partner with Henderson Construction Company, despite their earlier rejection. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Henderson agreed to the partnership. Whether motivated by potential profit or genuine change of heart, he worked professionally with Marcus throughout the project. When the gymnasium reopened ahead of schedule and under budget, Henderson publicly credited Marcus's organizational skills and construction expertise. "You know," Henderson said at the school board meeting, "I may have been wrong about some things. Good workers are good workers, regardless of where they come from." It wasn't an apology, exactly, but in a small town it was progress. By the time spring arrived, Marcus had purchased his own small house on the edge of town, just 2 miles from Robert's farm. His sister Sarah came to visit from Detroit, bringing her 2 children who immediately fell in love with the small town atmosphere and the gentle farmer who let them help collect eggs from his chickens. "I can't believe this is the same brother who left Detroit so bitter and defeated," Sarah said as they sat on Marcus's new porch, watching her kids play in the yard. "I'm not the same brother," Marcus replied. "This place, these people, they showed me something I had almost given up believing in." "What's that?" Marcus thought for a moment, watching Robert drive up the road on his old tractor, probably coming to discuss plans for the greenhouse they would start building next week. "That home isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're accepted, where you can contribute, where you can belong." That evening, as had become his custom, Marcus walked over to Robert's farm for dinner. They ate fresh vegetables from their expanded garden and talked about their plans for the growing season. The greenhouse was taking shape. John had offered Marcus a full partnership in the carpentry business, and the town council had asked him to serve on the planning committee for the annual harvest festival. As the sun set over the fields they now worked together, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had come to Millfield as a desperate man with nowhere else to go. He was staying as someone who had found not just a place to live, but a place to belong, and people willing to stand up for what was right when it mattered most. The small town that had once seemed so unwelcoming had become home, not because it was perfect, but because it contained people of courage and conscience who refused to let fear win, and in the end that made all the difference.